My name's Paul Kelly. I'm an associate of the Confederation of Cooperative Housing, CCH, who are delivering the 4 Million Homes programme. And I've been delivering some of the face-to-face sessions in the north. Currently, we're operating out of Newcastle, so we've run 3 of the 8 sessions face-to-face in Newcastle. So if you're from up that way, you're very welcome to come to the next one in September. I love this program and I love this webinar series and online stuff we do, because what I particularly love is seeing people from all over the country sharing and being involved in conversations about different topics. So tonight's session is all about scrutiny, and scrutiny is a way for residents to examine decisions, policies, actions that affect their home in order to hold their landlords to account and improve services. And I think through this whole series of work that 4 Million Homes is doing, we've been really learning about how regulation is becoming tighter and more involved for the expectations of what landlords should be doing. And actually scrutiny and how residents can actually unpick and look in detail at what your housing provider delivers is really critical. So we've got Caritas Charles, who's the Policy and Insight Manager at TPAS, and he's going to just put the context of the policy framework. And then we'll have Kai Jackson, who is the chair of the Scrutiny panel at Black Country Housing Group, and she's been the chair for over 3 years. So it'll be a real practical, live tenant experience of what it's like to be heavily involved in a scrutiny panel. So I think the 2 presentations together. So Charles is Caritas is given the kind of overview of policy and what it says your landlord should be doing, and Kai is the kind of real life example of how it works in practice.
My name's Caritas Charles. For those who don't know me, I recognise some faces. I'm the Policy and Insight Manager for TPAS, which is the Tenant Participation Advisory Service. And it's my job to work with tenants and landlords who are our members to influence policy and the stance of successive governments with regards to ensuring proper tenant engagement and tenant rights. And I'm very honoured today to be Kai's warm-up act for this session. And yeah, I'm a bit like the person they put on before Taylor Swift, so that for those who know. But I will do my best. So let me just share the screen. Okay, I've entitled this Scrutiny is Key, Tenants' Role in Scrutinising Services. And what I intend to do is just give I'm going to start by going through where scrutiny is particularly mentioned in the new consumer regulations and the new consumer standards that have come into effect. I'm going to briefly go through each of the 4 main consumer standards and talk about what role I think scrutiny can play with regards to actually getting landlords to adhere and follow those standards. It's by no means a definitive list of things, and hopefully you'll come up with others and raise some issues and concerns or ideas and suggestions from what I'm going to present. But let's just go on to the next one. So what does it say about scrutiny? It says that registered providers must give tenants a wide range of meaningful opportunities to influence and scrutinise their landlord's strategies, policies and services. This includes in relation to the neighbourhood where applicable. And I'll be talking a bit about the neighbourhood standard there as well. It also says registered providers must assist tenants who wish to implement tenant-led activities to influence and scrutinise their landlord's strategies, policies and services. I'm just repeating myself. Let's go again. Registered providers must provide tenants with accessible information. And this is what I think is key with regards to this, on how they are performing and delivering landlord services and what action they will take to improve performance where required. How they have taken tenants' views into account to improve landlord services, information and communication, and how income is being spent. So let's take a look at the first of the consumer standards, which is the safety and quality standard. And I'm not going to go into immense detail, I'm just going to highlight some key areas. So the key thing within stock quality is evidence, accurate, up-to-date, evidenced understanding of good quality, well-maintained and safe homes for tenants. Landlords are required to do this. And it can't be a desktop exercise. It needs to be based on an actual physical assessment. They need to use this data, and they need to evidence that they're using this information to ensure that they're compliant with health and safety, compliant with decent home standard, and we are due to see a new decent home standard arrive soon. The new Labour government has committed equally, I believe, to doing this, and the delivery of planned and responsive repair players, get my teeth in, and allocating adapted homes appropriately. Gone, for those of you who remember, are local offers. It looks at decency. There's a government directive on this from the previous government to ensure that homes meet the decent home standard. But there's a little clause in here, unless exempted by the regulator. And it's not been well clarified by the regulator what the exemptions might be. And as I mentioned, decent home standard is in the process of being updated, and there'll be a separate consultation. It's quite a technical thing. TPAS is on the government advisory panel for the last government on this. And once the new government kind of gets its panels and consultations together, we would hopefully expect to be involved in that as well. But early days yet. Health and safety. When acting as landlords need to take all reasonable steps to ensure tenants' health and safety in their homes and associated communal areas, meet all the legal requirements that I previously listed, ensure all requirements arising from assessments are carried out within appropriate timescales. We've been seeing recently, there's been some judgments made on consumer gradings that gave really low gradings to some landlords. And one of the main points that was raised by the regulator was timings, particularly in regards to issues of repairs, taking sometimes over a year to 2 years. And considering tenant safety in designing services and making sure risks are mitigated, not cutting corners, not looking necessarily for the cheapest option, but always putting safety as a priority. And going on to repairs, maintenance and planned improvements, must provide an effective, efficient and timely service. Easy reporting, it's got to be accessible to all tenants. Timescales, keep tenants informed in a clear and timely way. Understand and fulfill responsibilities for communal areas. Is it clear to all tenants the responsibilities of the landlord, but also the responsibilities of the tenants in a communal area? Ensure that delivery is informed by tenants' needs and provides value for money to the tenant. Interestingly, gone are the references to choices and right first time. Adaptations. Registered providers must assist tenants seeking housing adaptations to access appropriate services. Again, the emphasis on communication, and I'll keep coming back to this, because when I've talked with tenants who work in scrutiny, a lot of them say the major bugbear, the major issue that comes in time and time again is clear, proper and timely communication. Must cooperate with tenants, local authorities and others so that tenants get an adaptation service. So what role in this first of the consumer standards do I think can be for scrutiny? I think scrutiny can play a crucial role in the oversight of performance data. If you are not getting this health and safety, this building safety data, then I'd want to know why. And the indications of what that means for the housing provider. Scrutiny can play a crucial role in this. Do people who are tenant scrutineers work with tenant inspectors? Are you a tenant inspector as well? By tenant inspector, I mean a tenant that goes out, looks at properties, looks at the standards, and works with scrutineers and the landlord in ensuring that quality is maintained. Are we at diversity in scrutiny? And when I mean that, are we ensuring, if we're scrutineers or the landlords working with scrutineers, to ensure that we're understanding the tenant body and the needs of all individual and different tenants with regards to scrutiny? And making sure that tenant scrutineers are aware of changes in standards, what the standards are, and work on monitoring them and how the landlord is complying. And I'll keep coming back to this, monitoring how the landlord communicates with all tenants, making sure the information is clear on how the landlord is performing, what the rights and responsibilities of tenants are, and what the rights and responsibilities of landlords are. There is a requirement now, and the regulator needs to see that landlords are actively communicating, not just with tenants who are taking an active interest, but all tenants, so that they have the information that they want and need. And also there is, I think, a role for scrutiny and risk analysis, looking at the qualitative and quantitative warnings of what might be coming up in the future. Some of you may have seen the tragic reports from the Grenfell inquiry, and we looked for the reports being published later this year, where all too often with that and other issues of concern and other examples, warnings from tenants weren't necessarily reaching those that could make decisions, weren't necessarily reaching people that needed to be told. And that's a role I think could be crucial for scrutiny. And one of the interesting things, before I go further on this, is the regulator sees the vital role of scrutiny. I've talked with some people in the regulator for social housing, and they're very reluctant to give an indication of what makes a good provider with regards to consumer regulation or what doesn't. But at one recent event, a tenant asked the question, could you give an example of what would be a warning sign if you were inspecting? And they said not having a proper funded, resourced, and information supplied to scrutiny function for tenants would be a warning sign for us. So they value scrutiny as being a vital component in ensuring that consumer standards are met. So let's have a quick look at a transparency, influence, and accountability standard, which is really hard for me to say on a hot summer's day. But this used to be the old tenant involvement empowerment standard, but it's been beefed up. So let's have a look through this. One of the key points contained within the standard is fairness and respect. Registered providers must treat all tenants with fairness and respect. And I think it's really crucial to highlight that, particularly for the role of scrutiny. Diverse needs. I'm not going to go through all of this because I'm aware of time, but take action to deliver fair access and equitable outcomes on housing and landlord services. We can condense that to being fair. Understanding, use information and data to understand who tenants are. It still surprises me how many housing associations could not necessarily give you an answer to what their tenants, who their tenants are, and what your average tenant is, what the makeup of tenants are. It's still a work in progress with far too many housing associations. The consumer standard requires you to know. Ensure communication again. Communication is key, is clear, accessible, appropriate. Accessible as well, and support for online services if needed, but not a reliance on online services. A lot of people are saying digital by default, but to get to every tenant and to get rights and responsibilities and information about that to every tenant, you've got to use a variety of methods to communicate. Tenants and prospective tenants must be allowed to be supported by a representative or advocate, there must be that provision there. So here's some of the quotes from engagement tenants. Must take tenant views into account. With tenants, consider ways to improve services engagement and implement changes. Accessible for support for individuals to get involved, not an over-reliance, but looking at loads of menus of opportunity. And one of the examples from the first housing provider, one of the first Watford community homes, if you're on the call, congratulations, to get a C1 top grading in consumer standards, was they literally offered a menu of different ways to get involved and influence. They've got to go on there. If you're on the internet, go on there. It's fantastic. They've got things like, if you want a starter, choose this. If you want a dessert, choose this. A main course, choose this for your involvement. The way it's brilliant, it's accessible, really good to do. You've got to give her a range of options.
It was there.
Information about landlord services. People need to know what their rights are. Policies must be fair, reasonable, and transparent. People need to know what their policies are. Must make information available about senior team roles and responsibilities. It is a requirement now that if you don't feel your voice is being heard, you need to know who the person at the very top is that is responsible for that. And you have to have a clear channel to have access for that. And there has to be someone who the buck stops. That's as well as building safety. Consumer standards has to have somebody who is ultimately responsible for it. And that's a vital thing for scrutiny to know. So we've got to have performance information. How well is the landlord doing? So under the standard, they've got to meet something called the TSM, the Tenant Satisfaction Measures Requirement, which is basically a set of questions that tenants are asked every year. And tenants have got to know what those questions mean. But more importantly as well, they've got to know how they are used. And they've got to provide information on how well they're doing. They've got to provide information to tenants on how the views of tenants have influenced the direction of the organisation. You've got to, as tenant, you've got the right to know how the income from your rents is spent. And quite interestingly, you've got the right to know your director's pay and management costs. That has to be published as well. Looking at complaints, complaints must be addressed fairly and again, communicated simply and made accessible to all. And landlords must provide tenants with info about the volume, types, learning from complaints. That's another vital thing that scrutiny can play a role in, helping the landlords and helping tenants in ensuring complaints are actually working and the complaint system is working. So what role for scrutiny? I think scrutiny can work with landlords to ensure the understanding of tenant makeup, monitoring the effectiveness of influence and accountability. I think they can act as an early warning for the landlord and the regulator and the ombudsman on whether tenants are actually getting to those that make decisions and helping to influence those decisions and holding landlords to account. Because when the regulator and to some extent the ombudsman come into contact with the landlord, they'll want to know that tenants have influence and have the right to hold their landlords to account. I think more and more, and I'm not saying this enough, scrutiny groups can be involved in the TSM process in looking at how those questions are being thrown out there, looking at the lessons learned, more importantly, and looking at how those tenant satisfaction measures are being used by landlords. There is a kind of tendency in some areas, which I think is quite dangerous, to say, we've asked the questions, we've gone out to tenants, asked the questions, that's all we're required to do. It isn't. The tenant satisfaction measures are a tool. They are not an end in themselves. The regulator will want to see that you're using the information that tenants are giving to the landlord to make change. And if they don't see it, they'll want to know why. So that's why I've said to work with landlord on action plans arriving from those surveys and inspections, and monitoring and evaluation of complaints, I think, is another really important thing that if scrutineers aren't doing already, they should be. And also being independent, that if you're a scrutineer and you're a scrutiny group and you're not happy with the landlord and you've gone to them and you're still not happy with the landlord, the regulator encourages you to refer your landlord directly to the regulator. They have an email hotline set up for just that. Go on the websites for the regulator. They can do that. Scrutiny can act as an early warning. Landlords refer themselves. So, you know, if you have concerns and you feel your landlord's not addressing them, you can go down that route as well. So moving swiftly on, neighbourhood and community standard. Just highlight a couple of points here. Landlords must work cooperatively with tenants, other landlords and relevant organisations to contribute to the upkeep safety of shared spaces associated with their homes, and providers must work cooperatively to assist in resolving issues affecting the upkeep and safety of shared spaces associated with their homes. And you can notice the change of wording from the old and the new. It is gone from shall to must do that, which I think is a very key change. And one of the things that I think is really interesting in the new that I'll just highlight, the two here, cooperate with relevant partners to promote social, environmental and economic well-being in the areas where they provide social housing. This one here, identify and communicate to tenants the roles registered providers play in promoting social, environment and economic well-being and how they will achieve them. There is a responsibility for landlords to work with not just tenants, but local authorities, charities, organisations such as NHS trusts and the local police forums and other organisations to ensure the overall safety of neighbourhoods. And I'll come on to the fact that I think scrutiny can play a vital role in that too. So there's requirements around ASB as well, and there is a requirement to keep tenants informed about the progress of ASB cases and must support affected tenants, including signposting as well. And that links back to working with other organisations where there's issues of antisocial behaviour and having a common neighbourhood approach rather than working in individual silos. So what role for scrutiny? And I've yet to see this, and I think there's a real strong case for it. I think that there's a role in locality working. And what I mean for that is that your landlord will have people working with those organisations like charities, the third sector, police, hospitals, doctors, all these different community groups. And I think scrutiny could play a really valuable role in that, working in the community to gather community concerns, work with other organisations to look at priorities and to feed that into the work they're doing with their landlord. I don't see any reason why scrutineers can't work with the staff members that are doing this role in having effective community working. And likewise, as I put here, scrutiny groups forming their own relationships with people like the police, the NHS and charities as well. Being a good scrutineer involves having access to really good data. And I think you don't need to just be reliant on what the landlord provides you. Go out and make those partnerships. And I think it would look good for your role in scrutiny if you're doing that, but also your partnerships with the landlord as well. And looking at those agreements that your landlord has, community agreements or community plans, monitoring those, scrutinising those. Be interesting to see if you're doing that already, but I think that's a really great area for scrutiny to look at. Looking at your different engagement groups, do you have estate champions? Those people that are working in individual communities and working with them and setting up a relationship with scrutiny. And I will repeat this again and again, assuring and monitoring effective communication. Engagement breaks down, scrutiny breaks down when communication breaks down. And we need to ensure that we have really top communication. And I think scrutiny, people who work in scrutiny have a really crucial role in ensuring that. I think this is the homeward straight tenancy standard. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but allocations and lettings, there has to be fairness around that. It has to be communicated, and interestingly, within the new standards, got the requirement to minimise void periods, and also interestingly, a specific requirement to support those with support needs as well, which is interesting. But there are huge issues with allocations like waiting lists, the standard of accommodation, temporary accommodation, all of which I think how your landlord works in this area needs to be properly scrutinised, and there's a clear role for scrutiny as well. Looking at tenancy sustainment as well and evictions, landlords must support tenants to maintain their tenancy and offer advice if the tenancy has ended. So what is the role for scrutiny in this? I think that you should, if you're in scrutiny, be getting the data to monitoring tenancy issues such as the effectiveness of the allocation system and also how tenancies are being sustained and what support is being offered to tenants. Looking at communications assessments of what good communication looks like. Looking at how your landlord is reaching out to the diverse communities that your landlord covers. And also as well, looking at the strategic focus on tenant priorities and need. You know, a lot of landlords have an emphasis on new build and affordable housing, but where does that balance with maintaining existing stock? And, you know, your rights as a holder of a tenancy to have a decent, safe, affordable, warm home. So I think there should be more of an increase in the strategic influence that you would have as a scrutineer. And also ensuring that all tenants are understanding of their rights and responsibilities against all these standards and be given the opportunity to have their say and have their voice in the best way that they want to at the time that they want to, and that they understand that they can, because not everyone does. And I think it's a good role for scrutiny to work with landlords to ensure that all tenants have that information. They may not choose to use it, but they should have the right to know it's there. So what do I think, finally, are the key points for scrutiny? I think scrutiny needs to be embedded into the governance structure of every landlord. If you're a scrutineer, you should see where you sit in the organisation, and you should have a clear line of communication to the top and bottom and every department in between. They should understand the role that scrutiny plays in the with the landlord, and you should be able to be properly resourced for that. You should have access to data, and I said here with formalised parameters. There should be a set agreement between the scrutiny tenants and the landlord as to what information, and the goalposts cannot be changed. And that data should be regular and current. And clear channels for scrutiny to link with other engagement and tenant body. And what I mean by that is people like your estate champions, like your mystery shoppers, if you have them. Scrutiny should be having a conversation with those groups, and they should be having a conversation with scrutiny. And you as scrutineers, I believe, should play a pivotal role working with landlords' communication to assure it's clear and direct. And finally, most importantly of all, you should have independence. You should have the right to be an independent scrutineer. You cannot function properly unless you act independently. And that doesn't mean confrontationally, that means in partnership, that means working together, but it doesn't mean that the landlord should dictate what you do or say. And likewise, you shouldn't necessarily dictate to the landlord. They have a right to say no to you, but you should have a right to say no to them. And that's me.
So that was Caritas Charles from TPAS giving us the context and the overview. I'm now really excited to be. I've only met Kai for the first time today. I don't know how that happened, but it's been fantastic to meet Kai. So Kai Jackson is the chair of the scrutiny panel at Black Country Housing Group. And she's going to give us her experiences of being involved in scrutiny, successes and challenges, and how to overcome them. So I'm really thrilled to hand over to you, Kai.
Navigating through the world of scrutiny. So this is just my perspective of my journey kind of through scrutiny with my panel and Black Country Housing Group. So hopefully, let me see. Am I doing this right? Yes. So I'll say my journey started. I know some people was here earlier on. So my journey started through a complaint with my landlord, which didn't really go very well. It got resolved in the end after months of stress and headache and issues. I never knew about scrutiny or resident involvement prior to that. It wasn't something that was widely advertised throughout my landlord. So there's still a lot of people who didn't know about it. It is a lot more advertised now due to myself and my panel. But it wasn't something that many of us, and I think majority of my panel members weren't even aware that there was scrutiny or any resident involvement. So we kind of treaded through new waters, I should say. So a lot of it has been a learning curve, a lot of it has been trial and error. But after over 3 years now, and I've managed to retain my panel, besides one member who left for health reasons, and increased our panel. So hopefully I'm doing something right. So firstly, when becoming part of scrutiny, you've got to ask yourself a few questions. So why do you want to be on the panel? Can you be unbiased in your approach? What are your strengths and weaknesses? What can you give to the panel? What are you having trouble with? What may you need training with as well? And how is your team working? Because it's very much a collaborative process. For me, it's working with completely new people that I've never met prior to being in the panel. And it's learning people's behaviors and what they like, what they don't like, building that relationship and that strength as a panel. So it's very important that you think about it's not just an individual going off on your own, scrutinizing. You have to build that relationship with your panel. And I think that's one of the things that has made my panel quite strong as well. I definitely took the time to get to know everybody, speak to them, be a point of contact, checking in, see if they're doing all right, taking on additional things just to help and support them and build that relationship with them. So it was definitely a bigger journey than it actually says. When you're reading about the time commitments and everything on scrutiny, it is a bigger project you're taking on than initially realized. And the next thing I would say, a lot of organizations have scrutiny and different committees and things that you can do to get involved with as well. And they always say it will take 1 to 2 days out of the month, or it would take a week out of the month or something like that. That is a complete lie, for want of the best word. Scrutiny, proper, effective scrutiny can be time consuming. You are dealing with different people who have different learning needs, different ways of accessing information. You're dealing with older people, younger people, people who are working, people who are retired but have family commitments, people who have health issues. So you have to definitely take into consideration it's not a 9 to 5 gig. It's definitely can be a 24/7 commitment that you're making. So I think it's important that people are aware when signing up. If you want to do proper, effective scrutiny, there is a lot of work behind it. There is a lot of looking at data, looking at information, going out and doing your own researches, attending meetings, attending conferences to be fully effective and know what you're doing and actually be able to hold your landlord to account. You will need to go the step further than what your landlord may say is required from you for scrutiny. So it's always important to keep that in mind. If you want effective, positive scrutiny, it does take a lot of work and it is a big commitment. So this was brought up earlier as well, and I didn't have my presentation. So I always think it is important to understand your terms of reference and understand how that is the baseline and foundation for your scrutiny. That gives you, it's kind of like a contract in some ways between you and your landlord to say that this is what we require from you, this is the behavior we expect from you, this is how much meetings you should attend, this is the amount of work that you want, what we would like you to do. We would like you to do reviews, or we would like you to task and finishes. It gives you the better understanding of what scrutiny is and what your remits are. So firstly, have you read your terms of reference properly? I think a lot of people, when you join a panel, just sign it off and then just carry on and think, okay, we're just going to review services and different things like that. That's not always the case. Sometimes your landlord may be asking you to do additional things, or you may want to do additional things, but since it's not in your terms of reference, you're unable to fulfill those roles. So definitely read what they're asking of you. Do you understand it? Do you agree with it? Does it discriminate, or is it fair? Is it still relevant? I know with my organization, we look at the terms of reference annually. Since us being a panel, our roles have increased. They've asked us to do more things, but at one point I realized the more that they was asking us to do, it conflicted with other roles that we had. So then the terms of reference came into place, that if you're asking us to do more, we need to be protected, that we can access information, we can talk to certain people, we can go out and do things. So if it wasn't covered in the terms of reference, then if anything happened, if there was a complaint, a conflict, or anything like that, then the terms of reference is there and it gives us that procedure of what to do should anything go wrong. So your terms of reference is made to support you in your role. And if there is any conflict, it is a source of reference between your panel and your landlord. So it is very important to have an up-to-date terms of reference. Make sure all of your panel members have read it and know about it, and make sure that your chair at least and your vice chair sits down with the landlord or whoever's your point of contact within the organization and go through it properly. Scrutinize the terms of reference, basically. And it is important to have very good leadership within your panel as well. I'm not going to toot my own horn on this one, but it is important to have very good leadership. But you should know the type of person that you're electing. And I know in some organizations with your landlord, there is a probation period. Some people may have 6 months, some people may have a year. That way it gives you some time to get to know the person you may have elected, because you may not have had much time during the training, and you just get to like have, and also the person can also see whether this role is right for them. So when you're looking for a chair, ask yourself, what is their leadership technique? Are they quite hands-on? Do they like to do it from afar? Do they micromanage? Are they able to speak up on your behalf? Do they know the policies? Have they got some background knowledge? Are they willing to not clash? Are they willing to speak up for your panel and your the tenants within the organization as well? Do they know how they want to run the panel too? Are they very much, let's all get together, work ethic kind of thing? Everybody has different leadership techniques. With me, I tend to utilize the strengths and weaknesses of my panel members. I know some people don't like to some people don't like technology as much, so they wouldn't do the desktop. So therefore, but they do like talking to other tenants. Some people are really good with the technology side of it. We have a panel member that is absolutely brilliant with finance. So when we have the reviews, we have different sections that pulls out the strengths of panel members, so they all feel like they've contributed to their strengths. Have you got the time and commitment and the passion to commit to being the chair or in a leadership role in your scrutiny panel? It does take a lot it takes a lot of time, takes a lot of commitment. Whatever you feel your panel members are putting in as a chair or a leader, you're putting in maybe 3 times as much, because you're there to also support your panel members along their journey as well. And are you being supported also as a chair? It's important that your landlord, whoever your point of contact is, be a confidant in some way, or an ear to complain to every now and again, some way that you can protect your mental health and your ability to carry out the role. You need to be supported, whether that is with your landlord, hopefully, or whether that is with a different person, protecting confidentiality, by the way. But everybody needs support along the way. And do you inspire trust from your panel? Your trust from the panel is paramount to everything. I have panel members that have health conditions, family issues, but when I pick up the phone and ask them, could you do this or could you send this? It's so easy, and we've built that trust and respect for each other that it makes it fun and enjoyable. And particularly, I have one panel member who makes the most dirtiest jokes. It's absolutely wonderful. It's perfect. It just blends in with the humor of the panel. So it's all about collaboration, collaborating with your panel, collaborating with other tenants, collaborating with operatives, collaborating with your landlord, collaborating with external contractors as well. Being part of a scrutiny panel committee is about collaboration. So please bear that in mind. No team is an island, and it definitely takes a lot of work. So be ready to talk to people, engage, do your research, find out, build that collaboration. And sometimes it's hard to think to yourself, why am I on this panel, and what can I bring to this panel? What qualifies you to be part of a scrutiny panel is your lived experience. It's you, it's the services that you are receiving from your landlord. It's you looking at how they have spoken to you, how they have treated you. Have they been on time? Have they followed up? Your lived experience is what makes you perfect to be part of a scrutiny panel. So never underestimate how much you are effective when it comes to being part of Scrutiny, because you yourself is what's important. And lastly, I would just say enjoy it, enjoy the time, enjoy the camaraderie, have some dirty jokes, go out, see if your landlord will pay every now and again for you to get liquored up. You know, it doesn't have to be every month or so, it could be Christmas. Just enjoy the whole process. You're going to meet so many different people, wonderful people. Some people you may not get on with, but people are people. You get that everywhere you go. If you're not enjoying what you're doing, then why are you doing it? So a lot of the times it is free, it's unpaid work. You do it for the passion of it, but you have to enjoy it.